There is a book that people have carried their hardest questions to for 3,000 years. Questions about whether to leave, whether to stay, whether to speak, whether to wait. Questions asked in throne rooms and in farmhouses, by generals and by frightened young people, by scholars who had studied it their whole lives, and by people who had never seen it before and were simply desperate. 3,000 years of the most difficult questions a human being can ask. And in all of that time, across all of those centuries, it has never once given an answer. Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Tonight, you do not need to do anything at all. You do not need to follow closely. You do not need to remember a single name or a single date. There will be old words and old figures in what follows, and some of them are Chinese, and some of them are strange, and I will explain every one of them gently as we go, in plain language, the way you would explain something to a friend who was already half asleep. Nothing here is a test. There is nothing to figure out and nowhere else to be. If your attention drifts off somewhere in the middle of a sentence and you never come back to it, that is not a failure. That is exactly what this is for. Let the words be a low light left on in another room. You do not have to look at the light to be comforted that it is there. So settle in. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they have been holding themselves all day. Let the pillow take the full weight of your head, all of it, so that your neck has nothing left to do. Take one slow breath in through the nose and let it go without hurrying it out. And let me tell you, slowly, about the strangest and gentlest book I know. Its name is the I Ching. You will also see it written as the Yijing, which is closer to how it actually sounds, something like Yijing. In English, it is usually called the Book of Changes, and that is a good name for it, a true name, and we will come back later to why change is the whole idea. It is one of the oldest books in the world that people still genuinely use, not just study, not just keep behind glass in a museum, use, open, and consult, and turn to when they do not know what to do. Most ancient books, if they survive at all, survive as objects of study. Scholars read them. Students are assigned them. But hardly anyone opens them the way you would open a letter that was written to you personally. The Book of Changes is one of the very few that people still open that way. Tonight, all over the world, the same as they did when it was young. And here is the thing that everyone gets wrong about it. Here is the small misfiling that throws away the entire treasure. When people hear about the I Ching, if they have heard of it at all, they file it under fortune-telling. They picture something occult, something for predicting the future, cousin to the tarot deck and the crystal ball. A way of peeking around the corner of time to see what is coming. And because they file it there, they never look inside. Because who needs another fortune-telling gadget? And that filing, that one small wrong drawer, means they miss the only genuinely interesting thing about it. Because the Book of Changes does not tell fortunes. It cannot tell fortunes. It was, if anything, built specifically not to. That is not a flaw in it. That is the design. That is the secret at the middle of it, and it took me a long time to understand it, and once I did, the whole book turned over in my hands and became something else entirely, not a way of getting answers, but a machine, a very old and very patient machine for getting the question out of you. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the whole of what I want to give you tonight, and everything else is just the slow unfolding of it. 3,000 years, the most serious questions a person can hold. And a book that will not answer a single one of them. If that book were really a fortune teller and a bad one, it would have been thrown out in a single generation. Nobody keeps a broken oracle for 3,000 years. So the fact that it was kept and kept and kept tells us something. It tells us that the people who kept it were never really after the fortune. They were after something else, something the book gives so quietly that most people never even notice they have received it. We will get there. Let the question hang there in the dark for now. It has waited 3,000 years. It can wait a little longer. Let me show you first what the book actually is, because it is so much simpler than you would expect, and the simplicity itself is a kind of comfort. You might imagine that a book this old and this revered would be dense, ornate, impossibly complicated. It is the opposite. The entire thing is built out of a single decision made over and over. One choice, repeated, and the choice is about as simple as a choice can be. Imagine a single horizontal line, drawn left to right, about as long as your hand is wide. Now that line comes in only two kinds. Either it is a solid, unbroken line, one continuous stroke all the way across, or it is a broken line, a line with a gap in the middle so that it is really two shorter dashes with a space between them. That is all, whole or broken, solid or open. Those are the only two possibilities in the entire system, the two letters of its whole alphabet. The unbroken line, the solid one, is called yang. You have probably heard that word. It is the firm one, the active one, the bright side of the hill where the sun falls. And the broken line, the one with the gap, is called yin. That is the yielding one, the receptive one, the shaded side of the hill. Firm and yielding, active and receptive, light and dark. You do not need any mystical belief about these two to follow along tonight. Just picture them as they are on the page. One line, solid, one line with a gap in the middle. That is the seed of everything. Now here is where it becomes elegant. You do not just draw one line. You stack them. You take 6 of these lines and you set them one on top of another, like 6 planks laid flat in a small stack, or 6 shelves, or the 6 rungs of a very short ladder. 6 lines, each of them either whole or broken, stacked into a little tower. And that little tower of 6 lines is called a hexagram. Hexa, meaning 6. A figure of 6 lines. In Chinese the word is gua, a hexagram, a stack of 6 lines, each one solid or broken. And because each of the 6 lines has exactly 2 possibilities, whole or broken, and there are 6 of them, you can work out with a little patient arithmetic how many different stacks are possible. 2 possibilities for the first line, times 2 for the second, times 2 for the third, and so on 6 times over. 2 multiplied by itself 6 times, that comes to 64. Exactly 64. Not 63, not 65. 64 possible hexagrams, and that is the whole book. 64 figures, each one a stack of 6 broken or unbroken lines, and every single one of the 64 is present and named and given its own chapter. Nothing is missing. It is the complete set. Every arrangement that can possibly exist, all of them accounted for, none left out. There is a deep, quiet satisfaction in that, I think, a small, closed world, a full deck, a house with exactly the right number of rooms and not one door that leads nowhere. 64 little towers of 6 lines each. And the claim the book quietly makes, the enormous claim it makes without ever raising its voice, is that those 64 figures are enough to hold every situation a human life can find itself in. Every predicament, every crossing, every waiting, every beginning, every ending. Not 64 answers, remember, It does not answer. 64 situations. 64 weathers of the soul. That is a different thing, and we will feel the difference more and more as the night goes on. Now, a small practical detail, and it matters, because it tells you how the book wants to be read. When you look at a hexagram, at that stack of 6 lines, you read it from the bottom up. Not top to bottom, the way you are reading these words, or the way you would read a page. Bottom to top. The line at the very bottom of the stack is the first line, the beginning. The line at the very top is the 6th line, the end. So a hexagram is a little story that grows upward, the way a plant grows, the way a building goes up, the way smoke rises. The bottom is where things start, down in the roots, in the ground, in the beginning of the matter. And as your eye climbs the stack, line by line, you are moving forward in time, upward toward the situation's height, and then its finish. Keep that in your mind, gently. These figures are read the way a tree grows, from the earth up toward the sky. There is something restful in it. You start low, and you rise. There is one more layer to the architecture, and then I will let it be, and we will go and actually read some of these figures together. Slowly, so that you can hold one in your hands rather than just hear about it. Because so far I have been describing the outside of a house you have not yet stepped into, and I would like you to step inside before the night gets too deep. The layer is this. A stack of 6 lines can also be seen as 2 smaller stacks of 3 lines each, sitting one on top of the other. 3 lines on the bottom, 3 lines on top, and a stack of just 3 lines has its own name. It is called a trigram, tri meaning 3, a figure of 3 lines. And just as there are 64 possible 6-line hexagrams, there are exactly 8 possible 3-line trigrams. 2 possibilities for each of 3 lines, 2 times 2 times 2 gives you 8. 8 trigrams, and 8 times 8, 1 for the bottom half and 1 for the top half, gives you back your 64. So the whole book can be understood 2 ways at once, as 64 hexagrams, or as every possible pairing of the 8 trigrams, upper and lower. It fits together like something machined, though it is older than almost any machine. These 8 trigrams have a set of the loveliest names, and I want to give them to you now, not to memorize. Please do not try to memorize anything tonight, but just to let them drift past like 8 small pictures, because that is what they are. Each of the 8 is matched to something in the natural world, some large plain feature of the landscape that you already know in your body. The first is 3 solid lines, all yang, all firm, stacked together. Its name is Ching, and its image is heaven, the sky itself, the open, bright, endless above. The second is 3 broken lines, all yin, all yielding, stacked together. Its name is Kun, and its image is earth, the ground under you, the soil, the field, the patient, receiving land. Those 2, all solid and all broken, are the poles, and between them are the other 6, each a mix. There is Zen, whose image is thunder, the sudden shock and roll of it, the sound that arrives up out of the ground and moves. There is Khan, whose image is water, not the calm lake, but the flowing, plunging, dangerous kind, water in a gorge, water that finds the low places. There is Jen, whose image is the mountain, stillness, the thing that does not move, that stops you, that makes you go around. There is Zun, whose image is wind, and also wood, the gentle, penetrating thing, the wind that gets in through every crack, the tree root that works its way patiently into stone. There is Li, whose image is fire, brightness, clinging flame, the light that depends on what it burns. the thing that gives light and clings and cannot stand alone. And there is Dewey, whose image is the lake, the open, joyful water gathered in a low place, the marsh, the still gleam, the pool that reflects the sky. Heaven and earth, thunder and water, mountain and wind, fire and lake. 8 plain features of the world you have stood inside 1,000 times. And the book's quiet genius is that it takes 2 of these at a time, stacks one over the other, and reads the result as a scene. A landscape, water standing over fire, thunder rolling beneath the earth, a mountain sitting above a lake. And from the picture of those 2 natural things meeting, it draws out the shape of a human situation. That is the method. That is how 64 stacks of lines become 64 weathers of a life. We will watch it happen close up in just a little while, and I promise it is more beautiful in the doing than in the describing. But before we step inside and read, I want to leave 3 small doors open in your mind. 3 little loose threads. Do not pull on them. Just notice they are there, hanging in the dark, and know that before the night is over, I will come back and tie each one off, gently, so that nothing is left unfinished. Well, almost nothing is left unfinished. You will understand that strange qualification much later, and it will turn out to be the sweetest part of the whole book, but that is very far away, and you may well be asleep long before we reach it, and that is completely all right. Here is the first open door. I told you that this entire book, this whole 3,000-year-old world of meaning, is built out of a single choice made 6 times over, a line either whole or broken, on or off, one or the other. Hold on to that, because that exact same choice, that same binary flicker of one or the other repeated in a stack, is the choice that every computer on Earth is built from. Every machine you own, every screen, every message, all of it runs on nothing but long stacks of on or off, whole or broken, 1 or 0. And there is a true story, a documented story, about a European man 300 years ago who opened this ancient Chinese book, looked at these stacks of solid and broken lines, and recognized his own new mathematics staring back at him out of the deep past. We will get to him. Leave that door open. Here is the second open door. The book has 64 chapters, 1 for each hexagram, and they are arranged in an order, 1st to 64th. Now you would think a book like this, a book people turn to in the middle of their troubles, would want to end on something final, something complete, something resolved. And it very nearly does. The 63rd chapter is actually named after completion, the situation of a thing brought to its finish. That would have been the perfect place to stop. But the book does not stop there. It goes one more. It ends on the 64th, and the 64th is named something else entirely, something unfinished, and it closes the whole 3,000-year book on an image of something not yet done. On purpose, it chooses to end one step short of the far bank. Leave that door open too. It is my favourite of the 3. And here is the third door, the most practical of them, and the one that is really the heart of everything I have been circling. I told you the book refuses to answer. But there is a thing you have to do before it will even open to you. A single requirement. You are not permitted to consult the Book of Changes until you have first done one thing, and that one thing, it turns out, is the only part of the whole ritual that ever actually helps a person. Not the figures, not the lines, not the old words. That one thing you have to do first. Leave that door open widest of all, because when we finally walk through it, Everything I have said tonight will quietly rearrange itself into something you might recognize from your own long nights. 3 open doors. Do not worry about keeping them straight. I am keeping them for you. That is my job tonight, to hold the threads so you do not have to. Now, let us pause here for just a moment before we go inside and read our first figure. Take a slow, deep breath all the way down and let it out even more slowly than you took it in. Notice, if you can, that your body has already grown a little heavier since we began, a little more willing to be held by the bed beneath it. There is nothing you need to carry into the next part. The 3 doors are held. The 64 figures will still be there. When you are ready, and only then, we will step inside the oldest book still in use, and we will read, line by line from the bottom up, the very first of its 64 situations, the one made of 6 solid lines, all firm, all bright, the one whose image is heaven itself. Let me tell you, while your breathing settles, a little more about the feel of the thing, so that when we open it, it is a familiar object in your hands, and not a strange one. Picture the book as it might really sit on a table. In the version most people in the West have ever actually held, it is a solid, serious volume. And we will come, much later, to the story of exactly how it crossed the ocean and arrived in English, and who translated it, and the famous doctor who wrote the introduction that made a whole generation of readers see it as a mirror for the mind rather than a crystal ball. That is a story for the far end of the night. For now, just picture a heavy book, and inside it 64 short chapters. Each one headed by its little tower of 6 lines, drawn plainly, some solid, some broken. And under each figure, the same fixed set of parts, always in the same order, chapter after chapter. So that once you have learned the shape of one chapter, you have learned the shape of all 64. There is a great restfulness in that regularity. Like the regularity of a house where every room is laid out the same way, so that you could find the light switch in the dark. Each chapter gives you, first, the name of the hexagram, a single word or short phrase for the situation. Then it gives you a short, dense, oracular pronouncement about the whole figure, a handful of lines that set the weather of the thing. Then it gives you the picture, the reading of the 2 trigrams as a landscape, water over fire, wind over mountain, and from that picture it draws out an attitude, a way of holding yourself, always in the same grammatical shape, which I will show you when we get there, and which is the very hinge of tonight's whole idea. And then, last, it gives you 6 short lines of text, one for each of the 6 lines of the figure, from the bottom line up to the top, so that you can read the situation not just as a whole, but stage by stage, as it grows and changes from its first stirrings at the bottom to its final condition at the top. That is the anatomy of every one of the 64. A name, a pronouncement, a picture with an attitude drawn from it, and 6 small stage-by-stage readings, bottom to top. Simple, repeating, complete, you could learn its skeleton in an evening, and then spend the rest of your life inside its flesh, and people have. There is a very old story, which we will come to, of a man who read his copy so many times that the leather cords holding the pages wore through and broke. Not once, but 3 times, and each time he had them mended and went on reading. 3 times through the binding. That is not the reading of a man looking up his fortune. That is something else. That is a man in a long conversation. Leave that image with the others, softly, a worn book. Broken cords, mended and mended. Someone who could not stop returning to it. But I am getting ahead of the night, and there is no hurry at all. The whole point of this book, the deepest thing in it, is that there is no hurry, that the slow way is the true way, that the situation ripens from the bottom up and cannot be rushed any more than you can pull a plant taller by tugging its leaves. Even the oldest way of consulting it, which we will come to, was made deliberately. Almost cruelly slow, a long counting ritual with a bundle of dried plant stalks, 50 of them, sorted and divided and counted out over and over by hand, just to build a single one of the 6 lines, and then done all over again for the next line and the next, so that to raise one full hexagram out of the bundle could take the better part of an hour. And that slowness was not a flaw they never got around to fixing. The slowness was the medicine. The hour of counting was an hour in which the person doing it could not do anything else but sit with their own question. But I am getting ahead again. That is the 3rd door, and I am keeping it for you. So let your mind go quiet now, as quiet as the surface of Dewey, the gathered lake, the still pool that reflects the whole sky without trying. We have laid the ground. We know what the object is, 64 figures, each a stack of 6 lines, each line either whole and firm, which is yang, or broken and yielding, which is yin. We know to read them from the bottom up, the way a tree grows. We know they can be seen as pairs of the 8 trigrams, heaven and earth, thunder and water, mountain and wind, fire and lake, read as landscapes. We know the book refuses, as a matter of design, to hand out answers, and we know there are 3 doors left open in the dark, 3 threads I am holding for you, the choice a computer is built from, the ending that stops 1 step short, and the one thing you must do before the book will open at all. That is enough to hold. It is more than enough. And now, with your breath slow and your body heavy, and the bed taking all of your weight, let us go and stand in front of the very first of the 64. 6 solid lines, one above another, all of them firm, all of them yang. Not a single gap anywhere in the stack. The most active figure in the whole book. The pure creative force. And its image, its landscape, is the simplest and the largest there is. Not water, not mountain, not fire, but the open sky itself, heaven, doubled, above and below, nothing but the bright active above going on and on. They call it Qian. They call it the creative. And when you read its 6 lines from the bottom upward, a single figure moves through all of them, changing at each stage, rising as your eye rises, and that figure, in the oldest layer of this 3,000-year-old book, is a dragon. Let us go and watch the dragon, one stage at a time, beginning at the very bottom, down in the dark where nothing has happened yet. The bottom line of hexagram 1 is the first one drawn. It is the ground. And what the oldest layer of the text says about this line. This single yang line sitting at the very foot of the figure, before anything has moved or risen, is this, a hidden dragon. Do not act. That is the whole of it. 4 words in the English. Fewer in the Chinese. And yet consider what the book is already doing. You have come to it, presumably, because something is pressing on you. You want to know what to do. You are at the bottom of a situation, or so it feels. And the book's first answer, in its very first line of its very first figure, is, do not act. Not because the situation is wrong, not because you are wrong, but because the dragon, whatever the dragon is, whatever force you are carrying, whatever it is in you that wants to move, is still hidden. The time has not come. The line does not say never. It does not say be afraid. It says hidden. Do not act. The time is simply not yet. Take a slow breath here if you like. Notice the dark outside the window, or the dark behind your eyes. There is no urgency here. Let the first line sit exactly where it is. But before we climb further, let me show you the shape of the room we are standing in. Because this is the thing about the I Ching that no brief description ever quite conveys, each of the 64 hexagrams is not simply a symbol. It is a small building with rooms, and to move through it properly, you need to know how the building is put together. Every hexagram in the book has the same architecture, always, without exception. First, it has a name. The first hexagram's name is Qian, which can be rendered as the creative, or as heaven, or as the firm. Different translators reach for different English words, because the original carries several of these meanings at once, and the Chinese does not feel the need to choose. Then, after the name, comes what the Wilhelm Baines translation calls the judgment, Tuan in Chinese. This is the oracular pronouncement, the text that was most likely there from the very earliest stratum of the book, probably composed somewhere in the Western Zhou, in the centuries between roughly 1,000 and 750 years before the Common Era. In a world of bronze vessels and oracle bones and courts where diviners were among the most important people in any palace. The judgment is the old core, the word of the book, short, often strange, sometimes barely grammatical, as if compressed by enormous weight into just enough syllables to survive. After the judgment comes the image, the Daxiang, the great image. This is one of the 10 wings, the later philosophical commentaries added during the Warring States period and the Han dynasty, centuries after the original judgment texts were set down. And this is where something unusual happens. The image does not translate the judgment or explain it. It looks at the 2 trigrams that make up the hexagram, a gram. Remember, every hexagram is really 2 trigrams of 3 lines each, stacked, and it names what those 2 trigrams look like as a landscape. Then it draws a conclusion about how to be, not what to do, how to be. And it addresses that conclusion, almost always, to the Junzi, the noble one, the exemplary person, the superior man in Wilhelm's translation. A phrase that can sound stiff in English, but that carries in Chinese a meaning closer to the person who is trying to become worthy, the person consulting the book, presumably if they are consulting it in good faith. The image formula, repeated across all 64 hexagrams with small variations, is this. Here is the landscape. Here is what these 2 trigrams look like when set against each other. And thus the superior man, thus the Junzi, does or holds or becomes such a thing. Not, this is what will happen. Not, this is what you should do next Tuesday. But, given this configuration of the world, here is the quality of character that the situation calls for. That is what the image always says. Every time, in all 64. Character, not outcome. Stance, not schedule. And then after the image come the 6-line statements. The Yao Qi, 1 text for each of the 6 lines, each describing the quality or the warning or the image that belongs to that position in the hexagram. These are read only when a line in a casting comes out as a changing line, a line in the process of flipping to its opposite. A changing line is the place where the situation is moving, where the energy is unstable, where something specific needs to be heard. Most of the time, you read the hexagram's judgment and image. But when a line changes, you read its text too, and when lines change, the hexagram transforms into a different hexagram altogether, the second figure, the hexagram of where things are tending. But all of that is for later. Right now, we are standing at the foot of the first hexagram, and there is a dragon hiding in the lowest line, not yet ready to act. Let us climb. The second line of Hexagram 1, the second from the bottom, the second yang line in a column of 6, says this: a dragon appearing in the field. It furthers one to see the great man. The dragon has come up from hiding. It is visible now. It is present, here, in the ordinary world, in the field, not some royal court, not some high peak, but a field, a recognizable place. And the line says, in this moment, it furthers one, it is beneficial, it is good, to see someone of quality, someone who knows more, someone who has walked this ground before. The dragon in the field does not need to fly yet. It needs to find a teacher. To look around at the world it has emerged into and understand what kind of landscape it is standing in. Think of something you were once at the beginning of, some work, some relationship, some long period of your life, the early stage when you were visible but not yet powerful, when the right move was to find someone who knew. When being teachable was not weakness, but the specific intelligence the moment required. The second line knows this stage. It does not think less of it. It gives it a name. Third line. The middle of the lower trigram, and the text here is sobering and specific and strangely human. It says, all day long the superior man is creatively active. At night his mind is still beset with care. Danger. No blame. No blame is a phrase that recurs through the I Ching, and it is worth pausing on. It does not mean everything is fine. It means you are not at fault for finding yourself in this position. The situation is genuinely hard. Caring at night, the mind still working when the body wants to rest, this is not a failure of character. It is the honest experience of the third stage of any rising. The place where you are active by day and anxious by night, and the question of how to proceed is real and unanswered. The book does not solve that. It says, danger. No blame. You are not doing anything wrong by not having the answer yet. The danger is real, but so is the fact that you cannot be blamed for it. There is something tender in this line, I think. At 3,000 years' distance, it is still recognizable, still true. The mind beset with care at night, yes, you know that mind. Most people who reach for a very old book at midnight know that mind. Take a breath. You do not have to solve anything tonight. You are just watching a dragon rise. Fourth line. This line says, wavering flight over the depths. No blame. The dragon is airborne now, but unsettled. It hovers above the deep water. It has not committed to the heights. It is testing. This is the hinge moment, the line that sits at the boundary between the lower trigram and the upper trigram, between what has been and what is coming. And the book's instruction here is not fly and not land. It is simply no blame. You are allowed to waver. You are allowed to not yet know whether to rise or to turn back. The wavering itself is part of the flight. The dragon does not have to know in the fourth line where it is going. It has to be airborne. Fifth line, 6 solid yang lines, and this is the fifth one up. This is, and the image here is unmistakable, the flying dragon in the heavens. It furthers one to see the great man. The dragon is aloft, fully, completely, at height. The same phrase about seeing the great man, as in the second line, returns here, but the context has transformed it. In the second line, it meant, go find a teacher. You are just emerging. Here, at the fifth line, it may mean something different. That at the peak of one's ascent, there is still something to learn from encountering what is greater than oneself. Or it may mean that at this height, you become the great man that others need to see. The text is not perfectly clear. The book does not make it clear on purpose. That ambiguity is the space where the person consulting it has to do the work. The flying dragon. The peak. Most hexagrams reach their best position in the fifth line. It is the central line of the upper trigram, the place of balance and authority. Fifth lines in the I Ching tend to be good. This one is as good as they get, pure yang, at height, the image of power fully in motion. And then sixth line, the topmost, the line above which there is nowhere else to go. And the text says, arrogant dragon will have cause to repent. The dragon has flown past its height. It has gone too far. The energy that in the fifth line was glory has, in the sixth, tipped past its own apex and begun to reverse. The dragon at the top of its arc, still driven by the same force that carried it aloft, has crossed into arrogance, into the place where it no longer listens, no longer yields, no longer knows when to stop. And the book says, gently and without drama, it will have cause to repent. Not, it will be destroyed. Not, it was wrong to fly. The dragon was right to fly. The flying was real. But every force in the world, the book is telling us, has a place where it becomes its own opposite. The creative, pressed past its own peak, undoes what it created. Yang, pushed all the way to its extreme, becomes yin. This is not a moral judgment. It is a description of how things move. 6 lines. One dragon, hidden in the field, working and worrying by night, wavering in flight, soaring, and then, past the top, a warning about arrogance. It is not a prediction, it is a map of the stages that any creative force moves through, in any context, a career, a project, a relationship, a period of your own life. The I Ching is not saying your dragon will follow this path. It is saying, this is the shape of the path, and different moments ask for different responses. Hiding is not inferior to flying. Flying is not superior to hiding. The question is always, which stage is this? Now let us go back to the judgment and the image of this hexagram, so you can hold the whole shape of it. The judgment of hexagram 1. As Richard Wilhelm and Carrie Baines put it into English in 1950, reads, the creative work's sublime success, furthering through perseverance. Sublime success, furthering through perseverance. 4 English words for the oracular core of the most yang, most active, most initiating force in the whole book. Notice what it does not say. It does not say you will have success. It does not say act boldly. It says the creative works that way, that sublime success is in the nature of the force this hexagram names, and that it furthers, it benefits, it moves forward through perseverance. The judgment is describing a force and its quality, not writing you a personal forecast. And the image, the daxiang, the landscape reading added by a later philosophical hand, says this, the movement of heaven is full of power. Thus the superior man makes himself strong and untiring. The movement of heaven. 2 trigrams, both Qian, both heaven, upper and lower, heaven doubled, heaven all the way down as well as all the way up. The image is the sky's own motion, the great turning of the celestial sphere that the ancient Chinese observed as the fundamental, never-resting movement underlying everything, full of power, not frantic, not violent, steady, untiring, and thus, and here is the instruction, the only instruction the image gives, the superior man, the Junzi, makes himself strong and untiring. Not attack, not seize, not achieve, but be strong and untiring. The sky does not force itself, it simply keeps moving. Its power is in its consistency, its absolute refusal to stop. The image is not telling you what to do next. It is telling you who to be as a baseline stance toward the situation, the same person the sky is, patient in its enormous motion. That is Hexagram 1. That is the first room in the first building of a 64-building city that has been walked through for 3,000 years. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow breath. The first hexagram, the creative, the pure yang, it has been held. You do not need to carry it anywhere. Let it settle in the way an image settles when you stop looking directly at it and simply let it be in the room with you. When you are ready, we will step across the threshold into the second. Hexagram 2 is called kun. The character is. And if you drew it on the page, all 6 of its lines would be broken, not the unbroken firm strokes of Qian, but each line with a gap in the middle, each one yielding, each one open. 6 broken lines, one above the other, nothing unbroken anywhere in the figure. Where Qian is pure yang, kun is pure yin. Where Qian is heaven, kun is earth. Where Qian is the creative, kun is the receptive, the 2 poles, the 2 parents, the 2 extremes between which the remaining 62 hexagrams exist, every one of them some combination of broken and unbroken, yin and yang, some mixture of these 2 pure forces. It would be easy, and it would be wrong, to read kun as the lesser hexagram, the passive one, the one that just sits there while Qian does things. The 10 wings are explicit about this, and worth following. Kun is not inferior. It is not Qian's shadow or its subordinate. It is its complement in the deepest sense. What heaven moves, earth receives, sustains, and brings to completion. Nothing that heaven initiates would bear fruit if the earth did not carry it. The receptive is what makes the creative real. One without the other is not a half, it is nothing. The judgment of Hexagram 2 in Wilhelm and Baines, the receptive brings about sublime success, furthering through the perseverance of a mare. The same opening, sublime success, furthering through perseverance, and then the image changes. Not a dragon, a mare, and this difference is precise and considered. The dragon is aerial, singular, a force that rises above. The mare is of the earth, strong, tireless, built for long travel over ground, and she follows, not in weakness, but in the specific intelligence of knowing the terrain, of moving with the contours of the land rather than forcing through them. The judgment adds, if the superior man undertakes something and tries to lead, he goes astray, but if he follows, he finds guidance. This is not advising submission, this is advising something much subtler, the recognition that in certain moments, in certain situations, the wisdom is in yielding to what is moving, rather than forcing your own direction. The mare does not yield because she is weak. She yields because she is wise about the ground she is crossing. She knows that her power is in her endurance, her steadiness, the fact that she does not tire, not in charging ahead of the movement she is part of. The image of Hexagram 2, the earth's condition is receptive devotion. Thus, the superior man who has breadth of character carries the outer world. The earth's condition is receptive devotion. Not passive waiting, devotion, something warm and committed and attentive in the receiving. And the conclusion the image draws, the Junzi, the noble one, the person of broad character, carries the outer world. Carries, not dominates, not ignores. Carries the way the earth carries everything on it, every tree and stone and river and life, without claiming any of it, without asserting that any of it belongs to it, simply holding it all with steady and undemonstrative care. Breadth of character, the image says, not force. Breadth, I find this image particularly worth sitting with at night. When the mind tends to reach for the feeling of having power over things, over decisions, over how other people are, over what is coming. The earth in the image is doing none of that. It is under everything, holding everything, not requiring anything from what it holds. There is a kind of rest available in that picture, if you let it arrive. The two of them, Qian and Kun, heaven and earth, the creative and the receptive, are called by the 10 wings the gateway. They are the door through which all 62 other hexagrams pass. The same 10 wings say that heaven is movement, earth is stillness, and it is in the interaction between movement and stillness that the 10,000 things arise. The 10,000 things is a Chinese way of saying everything, all of it, every situation a human being can be in. Everything between these 64 hexagrams exists in the space between Qian and Kun. That is the gateway. You have now stood in it, on both sides of it, for as long as it takes a breath to settle. Everything else in the book is what happens between those two first rooms. Take a breath. Let the earth carry you for a moment, the way it does, the way it always has, without asking anything from you in return. We will move now to the third hexagram. And the third hexagram is where something very revealing happens, because after two pure forces, after heaven and then earth, the book does not put triumph third. It does not put clarity third, or success, or power. The first situation that arises when heaven and earth meet, when the creative and the receptive come together, is called Zun. The character is, and the Wilhelm Baines translation of its name is difficulty at the beginning. Hold that for a moment. The first two hexagrams are the pure poles, the perfect principles, and then, when those principles encounter each other in the actual world, the very first thing that happens is not a triumph, it is difficulty. This is the book already being more honest than most of us expect a 3,000-year-old oracle to be. The two trigrams that make up Zhun are Kan and Zhen. Kan is water, Zhen is thunder. And in this hexagram, the water is above, the thunder below. Thunder and water, both powerful, both forces that move and surge, but the arrangement is difficult. Thunder below water is the image of something trying to rise against something heavy, bearing down. The old commentary describes it as a blade of grass pushing against a stone, or a sprout in early spring, putting all of its force and all of its life into the effort to break up through hard ground, every cell of it working, and the stone above, or the frozen earth above, not moving yet. The judgment of hexagram 3, sublime success, furthering through perseverance. Helpers are needed. It furthers one to appoint helpers. Notice that the opening, sublime success, furthering through perseverance, is the same for Zhun as for Qian and Kun. This is not a lesser hexagram. The success is still there, still possible. But the judgment is being honest about something the first two hexagrams, those pure poles, did not need to say. Helpers are needed. You cannot push through this particular kind of hard ground alone. The sprout cannot move the stone by itself. It needs something, time, warmth, water from above, the softening of the earth, to happen alongside its own effort. Difficulty at the beginning is not a sign that the beginning was wrong. It is the nature of beginnings. And the image of hexagram 3, clouds and thunder. Thus the superior man brings order out of confusion. Clouds and thunder, the condition before a storm breaks, the tension that has built but has not yet released, and the Junzi in this image brings order out of confusion. Not by forcing the clouds to rain before they are ready, not by denying the confusion, but by, the image does not say how, which is typical of the I Ching, bringing order. The stance is one of tending, of holding the space with enough steadiness that when the moment of breakthrough comes, it finds the ground prepared. The third hexagram is not discouraging. This needs to be said plainly, because it is easy to read difficulty at the beginning as a warning, as if the book were saying, "You have chosen badly, this will be hard, perhaps you should stop." But that is not how the I Ching works, and it is not what Zhou says. The sprout pushing against the stone is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. Difficulty at the beginning is not the wrong beginning. It is the beginning that most real things have, because real things, unlike fantasies, encounter actual resistance from the actual world. There is a quality of reassurance buried in this hexagram that I think is worth naming. If you are at the beginning of something hard and you consult the I Ching and it gives you Zhou, it is not saying abandon this. It is saying you are at the stage where the blade of grass is pushing against the stone. Helpers are needed. Perseverance furthers. The ground will eventually yield to a sprout that keeps growing, and it will do so not because the sprout was powerful enough to break stone, but because the sprout was patient enough to wait for the conditions to change while continuing to push. 3,000 years of people have received this hexagram at the beginning of hard things. 3,000 years of people have been told, yes, it is hard, yes, you need help, yes, it furthers through perseverance, the stone does not move easily, the breakthrough, when it comes, will be real. Sit with that for a moment. If there is something in your life that is at its difficult beginning, and often there is, which is part of why midnight becomes complicated. The third hexagram does not ask you to solve it tonight. It asks you to keep pushing, gently, the way a sprout pushes, and to find helpers, and to persevere. You don't need to remember that, but if it is true for you, it may stay. Now I want to step back from the hexagrams themselves for a moment and say something about what we have just done, because it is the thing the I Ching does that most descriptions of it never quite name. We have read 3 hexagrams, 3 small buildings in that 64-building city, and none of them gave us an answer. The first one said, 6 stages of a dragon, from hiding to flying to crossing into arrogance, and the image said, be strong and untiring. The second one said, the perseverance of a mare, the earth that carries everything with receptive devotion, and the image said, carry the outer world with breadth of character. The third one said, thunder below, water above, a sprout against stone. And the image said, bring order out of confusion. Not one of them said, do this specific thing. Not one of them said, your question will resolve on such and such a date. Not one of them told us what was going to happen, or what decision to make, or whether we were right. Each one of them handed us a picture, a landscape of forces, and then, very quietly, suggested a quality of character appropriate to being in that landscape. Who to be, not what to do. And the strange thing, the thing that I keep returning to, the thing the 3,000 years of continuous use is evidence of, is that this turns out to be more useful than an answer. Not always, not for everything, but for the particular kind of midnight question, the one that sits in the body as a low, persistent weight, the one being turned over and over without ever being stated plainly. For that question, a picture often does more than a forecast, because a picture requires you to apply it. To say, given this landscape, what does it mean for where I am? And to say that, you have to first say where you are. You have to put it into words, even if those words are only whispered to yourself in the dark. You have to finish the question. The I Ching will not skip that step. It cannot skip it. The picture is a picture, not a verdict, and a picture is useless until someone stands in front of it and says, "I see the flying dragon." And I recognize that I am in the fifth stage, at the height of something, and I wonder if I have gone past it. Or I see the sprout against the stone, and yes, that is this beginning, that is this year, that is this slow and resistant ground I have been trying to move through. Or I see the mare, the long, strong, steady animal that yields without loss. And I have been trying to lead when the moment was asking me to follow. That recognition, that naming, is the thing. The recognition is the answer, insofar as there is one. And the book engineered itself over 30 centuries of use to produce precisely that recognition, not by giving you a verdict, by giving you a mirror shaped like a landscape. We have 3 more threads still held in the dark. The question of how the book is actually consulted, the stalks, the coins, the ritual that forces the question out before anything else can happen. The history layer, from the Western Zhou to the silk manuscripts to the leather binding, worn through 3 times by a very attentive reader, and the story of how this book crossed an ocean and found itself inside a generation of Americans who were looking for something they could not name, and then, much later, inside the mathematics of a German philosopher who found his own arithmetic already waiting for him in a Bronze Age diagram. But those are for the next breath, the next quiet passage of this night. For now, rest here with what we have. The first hexagram, 6 solid lines, a dragon rising through every stage from hiding to the heights and past them. The second, 6 broken lines, a mare's patient strength, the earth that carries all of it. The third, thunder pushing up through water, a sprout against stone, the world's first situation after the 2 pure forces meet, and it is difficulty, met with patience, met with helpers, met with the specific intelligence of perseverance. 3 small buildings in a city that has been standing for 3,000 years. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your body be heavy. Let the stone and the sprout and the dragon and the mare all settle somewhere quieter than thought, somewhere in the body that receives things without needing to analyze them. You do not need to hold any of this. You do not need to remember any of it. It has been here for 3,000 years already. It will still be here when you wake. The next passage is waiting, when you are ready, or whenever you drift. There is no rush. There is nowhere else to be. The book is patient. The earth carries everything with receptive devotion, and it does not ask to be thanked for it, and it does not tire. We will continue when the breath comes easy. There is a question that sits at the center of everything the I Ching actually does, more central than the hexagrams themselves, more central than the images of dragons and mares and sprouting grass. It is a question about how you are permitted to begin. And it is the kind of thing that gets mentioned briefly in books about the oracle, usually in a paragraph near the front called How to Consult, and then forgotten. But it is the mechanism, it is the whole thing, dressed in plain clothes, standing right at the threshold where most people walk past it. You cannot open the book until you have stated your question. Not wondered it. Not turned it over. Not let it drift through the mind in the soft, half-formed way that thoughts drift at midnight, arriving without edges, sitting without names. You have to say it. You have to put it into words that have a beginning and an end, a subject and something being asked about the subject. You have to arrive at the book, having done that one prior act. Because the method, Whichever method you use, the slow one or the fast one, requires a query to be present before it begins. The coins or the stalks or whatever you hold in your hands are not the thing that does the work. The formulation is the thing that does the work. The ritual just makes the formulation unavoidable. And this, only this, is what 3,000 years of use actually tells us. If you have ever lain awake with something unresolved, you know the texture of the problem. There is a decision, or a situation, or a relationship that has come to a place where something must shift. And you think about it. You approach it from this angle, then that one. You circle it. You feel its weight from one side and then the other. Hours can pass this way. The ceiling is the same ceiling. The room is the same room. The thinking continues but does not arrive anywhere, because thinking that has not yet found its question is not thinking toward an answer, it is thinking alongside an absence, bumping against the shape of something that has not yet been named. The I Ching's consultation procedure is, at its mechanical heart, a cure for exactly this. Let us stay with the slow method first, the older one, the one that was almost certainly in use during the Western Zhou period when the core text was being composed. 50 yarrow stalks. Yarrow is the plant whose Latin name is Achillea millefolium, a common enough herb, white-flowered, feathery-leaved, the kind that grows in meadows and along roadsides. The kind you might not notice unless you were looking for it. 50 stalks, dried, straight, smooth from handling. One is set aside immediately. You put it down and do not touch it again. Now you have 49. You divide the 49 into 2 random piles with a single sweep of the hand, no counting, no intention, just a division. Then you take 1 stalk from the right-hand pile and place it between the ring finger and little finger of your left hand. Then you count through the left-hand pile in groups of 4, setting the remainders aside. Then you do the same with the right-hand pile. You gather what remains, the stalk between the fingers, the remainders from both piles, and you put them aside together. This constitutes 1 pass. You do this 3 times to build a single line. Then you do all of it 6 times to build a single hexagram. The whole procedure, done carefully, takes somewhere between half an hour and an hour. This is not an accident, and it is not an inefficiency waiting to be corrected. The slowness is the instruction. There is something that happens in a long, repetitive, hand-occupying ritual that cannot happen in a quick decision. The mind, given something small and precise to do with the hands, begins to clarify. The question that you were required to state at the beginning has time to sit and settle. You begin to feel where it is soft and where it has edges. You begin to notice what you are hoping the stalks will say, and that noticing is itself data of a kind the book does not need to provide. By the time the first line is built, you have already learned something. By the time the 6th line is placed and the hexagram is complete, you have been alone with your question for the better part of an hour, in motion, counting, gathering, putting aside. And there is almost no one who would not arrive at the end of that process, knowing not what the answer is, but what the question actually was. This is the design. The 3-coin method came later, and it is faster. 3 coins tossed 6 times. Heads and tails are assigned numerical values. Conventionally, heads counts as 3, tails as 2, and the 3 coins tossed together produce a sum of either 6, 7, 8, or 9. Odd sums build yang lines, unbroken, even sums build yin lines, broken. 6 tosses, 6 lines, 1 hexagram. The whole thing can be done in 5 minutes. It is genuinely different from the yarrow method, and not only in speed. The arithmetic of the Yarrow procedure produces different probabilities for each of the 4 possible values than the coins do. The Yarrow is weighted in a specific way towards certain outcomes. Whether this matters is a question the book declines to answer. But the people who kept the Yarrow method alive across 3,000 years while the coin method also existed were not doing so out of ignorance of the faster way. They were doing so because they understood that the slowness was not a bug. The 3-coin method is still the method most people use today. It is what you will find described in almost every popular introduction to the I Ching. And it still requires, before the first coin is lifted, that you have stated your question. Now, there is something else about the consultation that deserves its own quiet moment, because it opens the book in a direction most people do not expect. Sometimes a line comes out what the tradition calls changing, also called a moving line or an old line, old yin, old yang. In the Yarrow method, a sum of 6 produces an old yin line, a broken line that is at the extreme of its nature and therefore on the verge of becoming its opposite. A sum of 9 produces an old yang, an unbroken line that is fully yang and therefore tipping toward yin. In the coin method, a sum of 6 or 9 marks the changing lines. 7 and 8 are stable. A changing line flips. Broken becomes unbroken. Unbroken becomes broken. And when you flip the changing lines, you do not just have notes in the margin. You have a second hexagram. A new figure, different from the first, built from the lines that were stable plus the lines that have changed to their opposite. The first hexagram is where you are. The second hexagram is where it is tending. A complete reading is often 2 figures and the texts of the specific changing lines between them, which is to say, a reading is a story that has a present chapter and an implied next chapter, with the lines in motion marking the hinge between them. If there are 64 possible hexagrams you can receive as a starting point, and each of those can change into any of the 64. Then the number of possible readings, present situation to future situation, is 64 multiplied by 64, which is 4,096. 4,096 distinct configurations of where you are meeting where it is tending. This is not a system that is running out of things to say. And this is before you begin reading the changing lines themselves, which each carry their own text, adding still more precision and more texture to what the book is, in its quietly indirect way pointing toward. The text never becomes less ambiguous, but it becomes more specific. And in the relationship between those two things, the ambiguity that refuses to close, the specificity that keeps pointing, the consultation finds its peculiar usefulness. Take a slow breath now. Let your hands be still. Let the count of stalks and the turning of coins settle somewhere behind you, the way the mechanics of a clock settle when you stop looking at the gears and only notice the time. The machine is not the point. It never was. We have spent some time with how the book works. Now let us spend some time with how it came to be, which is itself a story in 3 layers, and the layers matter because the book that most Americans have held in their hands is a very different object from the book that a diviner in the Western Zhou period would have consulted, though they share the same 64 figures. The oldest stratum is called the Zhou Yi, the changes of Zhou. Modern scholarship, following the work of researchers like Edward Shaughnessy and Richard Rutt, places the composition of the core divinatory text during the Western Zhou period, somewhere between roughly 1,000 and 750 years before the Common Era. The hexagram names, the judgments, and the line statements, these belong to the earliest layer. They were a diviner's working tool, a collection of oracular verdicts probably derived from long records of what had been asked and what had followed, not a philosophy, a professional manual. How far back the use of the 8 trigrams goes before this, or what systems preceded them, is genuinely unknown, and the book does not say. What can be said is that by the Western Zhou period, the 64 hexagrams and their core texts were already present in something close to the form we have them. Tradition says more than scholarship can confirm, and it is worth pausing here to let the two sit next to each other without collapsing one into the other. Tradition says that the 8 trigrams were first perceived, not invented, perceived by the mythical sage emperor Fu Xi, who is said to have seen them in the markings on the back of a tortoise or a dragon horse that emerged from the Yellow River. Fu Xi is a legendary figure. He is not a person scholarship can point to. But the story of him sitting with an animal from the water and finding, in the pattern on its shell, the first binary notation, a broken line, an unbroken line, and what you can build from those, has a quality that good origin stories always have. It says something true about the thing it describes, even if it is not biography. The insight the story contains is that the system was found, not made. It was observed in the structure of things. Whether any single person observed it, or whether the story simply honors an act of attention that happened gradually over generations, is a question the tradition does not bother to answer. Tradition says further that King Wen of Zhou, the founder of the Zhou dynasty, arranged the 64 hexagrams into their final sequence and wrote the judgments while imprisoned by the last tyrant of the Shang dynasty. A king in a cell, working with the Book of Changes, this story has everything a legend needs, and it is taken seriously as legend, which means it carries truth as a shaped thing, not as a documented record. The sequence King Wen is said to have established, the one where hexagram 1 is heaven and hexagram 64 is before completion, is the sequence the received text has always followed. Whether he established it in a prison cell, or whether a prison cell was added to his story because it seemed like the right kind of place for this kind of thinking, no one can say now with certainty. What can be said is that the sequence itself is deliberate. It was not arrived at arbitrarily. Tradition says further that King Wen's son, the Duke of Zhou, wrote the 6-line statements for each hexagram, the Yao Qi, the texts that speak to each position as a position, each line as a moment in the unfolding of the figure's situation. If the judgment tells you what kind of situation you are in, the line statements tell you what it is like to be in that situation at the very bottom of it. Then, one step up. Then in the middle. Then above the middle. Then near the top. Then at the very height. A vertical unfolding that makes each hexagram into something closer to a narrative. A study of how a situation changes as it rises through its stages. The 3 authorial names, Fu Xi, King Wen, the Duke of Zhou, constitute the traditional account of how the book was built. And they belong to a time when authorship was understood differently than it is now, when a text's authority derived from the figure it was associated with rather than from documentation of who held the brush. Use them the way you would use any living tradition, as a way of pointing toward something real, not as a claim you would stake your reputation on. Now the 4th name in the tradition, Confucius. Tradition holds that Confucius wrote the 10 Wings, the Shiyi, the set of 10 commentaries that transformed the Zhouyi from a diviner's manual into a text of philosophy. The 10 Wings include what is called the Great Commentary, the Yijing or Dazhuan, which is the most philosophical of the wings, a meditation on the nature of change itself, on the relationship between the changes and the cosmos, on what it means that all of this can be derived from a single broken or unbroken line. The Great Commentary is a remarkable piece of writing. It is not a how-to, it is a sustained act of wonder at the structure of the thing. Modern scholarship does not accept that Confucius wrote the 10 Wings. The language, the style, and the philosophical context all point to a much later composition. The Warring States period and the early Han dynasty, roughly the 4th through the 2nd centuries before the Common Era. The Confucian school produced the Wings in Confucius's name, or in his spirit, which in that tradition is not deception, but a form of honoring. What is recorded in the Analects, Book 7, verse 17, is Confucius saying that if he were given more years, he would spend 50 of them studying the changes, and that this would allow him to be without great faults. This is a statement of intellectual humility that scholars of a certain temperament have loved for a very long time. One of the most learned men in Chinese history, at what was apparently a late point in his life, saying that 50 more years of study would not be enough to do this book justice, but that it would help him avoid large errors. And then there is the story, flagged always as tradition, always as the kind of story that may not be biography and is something better than biography, that the leather thongs binding Confucius's bamboo copy of the I Ching wore through 3 times from repeated reading. In Chinese, the phrase for this is Wei Bian San Jue, the leather thongs broke 3 times. Whether it happened exactly this way matters less than what the image holds. A book so returned to that the physical object wore out under the attention. A text that was not read once and placed back on the shelf, but consulted the way a person consults a presence they trust, which is to say, again and again, and again through whatever the years brought. 64 images, leather thongs, 3 times. Take another slow breath. Let the throat soften. Let the shoulders settle back. You do not need to hold the history the way a student holds it before an exam. You can let it move through the way water moves through a hand. You feel it, you feel the temperature of it, and you do not need to catch it. Now there is something the history holds that matters in a particular way for a book that is supposed to be fixed, canonical, ancient, its sequence set. And it comes from the ground. In 1972 and 1974, archaeologists excavating a tomb at Mawangdui in Hunan Province, China, found a set of silk manuscripts that had been sealed in the tomb in 168 BCE. The tomb belonged to the family of the Marquis of Dai. The manuscripts included many texts, medical, astronomical, philosophical, and among them a copy of the I Ching. The Mawangdui I Ching has all 64 hexagrams. This is not a fragmentary or partial version. The text is complete, or very nearly so. But the 64 hexagrams are arranged in a completely different order from the received text, the text we call the I Ching today, the sequence of heaven, earth, difficulty, inexperience, waiting, conflict, and on through all 64. In the Mawangdui version, the sequence follows a different logic entirely, grouping the hexagrams by a different principle. And some of the characters used differ from the received text as well. What this means is important enough to sit with for a moment. The sequence that tradition attributes to King Wen, the sequence we treat as fixed, as the sequence, as the order the book has always been in, was, as of 168 BC, not universal. Someone placed a copy of the I Ching in a tomb for the dead to carry, and that copy arranged the 64 figures by a different arrangement. The book that was sealed into the earth during the Han dynasty was already old then, and it was already variable. Even what we think of as the fixed architecture of a 3,000-year tradition turns out to have been, in its living time, more like a river than a wall, carrying the same waters, not always within the same banks. There are also bamboo manuscript witnesses to the I Ching from the Warring States period, held in the collections of the Shanghai Museum and Tsinghua University, physical objects made of strips of bamboo tied in sequence, on which an early version of the text was written. These documented use of the text back to the centuries before the Common Era and confirm that what we have is genuinely ancient, genuinely continuous, and genuinely various. The text that eventually stabilized into the received form did so through centuries of copying and commentary and cultural pressure. It solidified the way a riverbed solidifies over time. Not because someone decreed its final shape, but because that shape proved durable. A book that old has been many versions of itself. The one we have is not the only one there was. And yet the 64 hexagrams are always there. The broken lines and the unbroken lines are always there. Heaven is always 6 unbroken lines. Earth is always 6 broken ones. Thunder and water and mountain and wind and fire and lake are always present, always arranged in pairs of 3. Whatever changed in the sequence or the commentary, the binary foundation remained. The one distinction, firm or yielding, present or absent, 1 or 0, held through everything. This is worth pausing at, not because it proves something about the book's cosmology, but because it says something about what the book was actually built on. You can rearrange 64 things in many orders. You can comment on them differently. You can frame them with different philosophies, associate them with different dynastic claims, translate them into different languages with different assumptions about what they mean. But you cannot change the fact that 6 binary positions produce exactly 64 possible configurations, and that this arithmetic is true in the Western Zhou, and in the Han, and in the Tang, and in the Song, and in 1924 when Richard Wilhelm was in China, and in 1950 when Carey Baines was in America, and tonight, in whatever room you are in, with whatever question you did or did not state before you found your way here. The foundation does not change because it is not a claim, it is a count. Now let us rest here a moment, at this hinge between the old history and the nearer one, the story of how the book crossed an ocean and arrived in American hands, which is the next passage we will walk through together. But not yet. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice where your body is heavy. Notice the weight of the back of your head against whatever is holding it. Notice the breath moving in, and the pause, and the breath moving out, and the pause after that, the small moment of stillness between exhale and the next inhale, which is its own kind of before completion, its own Weiji, its own fox 1 step short of the far bank. There is something to stay with before we move on. It is about the question, the one you were required to state before picking up the stalks or the coins, the one that is the mechanical heart of the whole procedure. 3,000 years is a long time to consult a book, longer than the Roman Empire lasted, longer than the gap between us and the Norman conquest doubled, longer than almost any continuous institution you can name. And in all of that time, the book did not change its central behavior, it returned images. It returned situations. It told you what the Junzi, the superior person, the noble one, the exemplary human, would do, which is to say, it told you what kind of person to be, not what outcome to expect. It never once said, yes, you should take the position. It never said, no, do not marry her. It never said, the harvest will be good this year, or the campaign will fail, or the illness will resolve. It said, there is water above and thunder below, And out of that meeting, the difficulty of a beginning, and thus the superior person pulls the threads together. It said, "The dragon is in the field. It is beneficial to see the great person." It said, "The mare moves across the earth with patient strength." And you, holding the stalks, or the coins, or the book, or yourself, you were left to do the last and only necessary work, which was to decide what that image meant in the specific, irreducibly personal situation that you had described in words before any of this began. This is why the book has lasted. Not because it predicts, because it refuses to. A book that predicted would only be useful if its predictions were accurate, and accuracy would be checkable. And what is checkable eventually fails its checks and is discarded. But a book that refuses to predict, a book that hands back a picture and asks you to find yourself in it, can never be wrong in that way. It is never making a claim you could refute. It is offering a mirror. And mirrors do not become obsolete. What the consultation does, the slow one or the fast one, is this: it forces the question to become specific enough to be held in words, and then it offers an image that has no obvious relationship to those words, and the mind, working in the gap between the question and the image, working in the space where the answer should be but is not, begins to produce something it could not produce in the abstract. Not an answer. A richer version of the question. A version that has more detail in it, more honesty, more of the parts you were not yet ready to name when you first lay down. This is what midnight thinking needs, and almost never gets by itself. Not a resolution, a sharper picture of what is actually being asked. The yarrow stalks are slow because the question needs time to become specific. The 3 coins are fast, but still require the question to be stated. The changing lines that produce a second hexagram are the book's way of saying, you are not only in a situation, you are in a situation that is already moving, and the movement has a direction, even if you cannot yet see where it tends. The 4096 possible present to future pairings are the book's acknowledgement that no 2 consultations are the same, even if 2 people ask questions that sound identical on the surface, because the questions they have stated, the words they chose, the things they left out, the silences around what they could and could not say, are never identical. The book is wide enough to meet all of them. And this was true in the Western Zhou. It was true when the Mawangdui copy was sealed into a tomb with a dead marquise's family in 168 BCA. Someone thought this book was worth carrying into whatever came after death, which is a kind of testimony to its usefulness that goes beyond anything a reviewer could say. It was true when the leather thongs of Confucius's copy, if the story holds the kind of truth that stories hold, broke through a 3rd time under the weight of his attention. It was true across the warring states and the Han and the Tang, across dynasties that rose like dragons in the field and grew arrogant and fell, across the long centuries during which the text was copied onto bamboo and silk and paper, commented on, argued over, memorized, used in courts and in private rooms, and in the hands of people facing decisions whose names we do not have. And then, when the time came, as it does for most things that have lasted long enough, it crossed the water. Let us rest at the crossing point. Take a long, slow breath. Let the exhale be longer than the inhale. Let everything behind this breath be behind you, the Zhou dynasty and the Mawangdui tomb, and the leather thongs and the counting of stalks. Let it all be part of the floor, something below you, something solid that holds you without requiring your attention. You do not need to remember the order of the things. The order does not matter for the sleeping mind. What matters is the shape of the thing, The fact of it, that a book was built on a single binary choice and has been used without interruption across 3,000 years, and that every person who used it was required, as the price of admission, to say in words what they were actually asking. And that requirement was the gift. It was always the gift. The book is patient. It has time. Whatever you are carrying tonight, the decision you have not stated plainly, the question whose edges you have been running your fingers along in the dark without quite touching the center of it, the book would wait for you to state it. It has waited this long. It will wait longer, and the stating is not hard. It only requires arriving at the moment when you are tired enough of circling to say the thing directly. That moment comes. For some people it comes in the middle of a slow ritual with 50 stalks, somewhere in the third or fourth counting, when the hands are busy and the mind is quiet, and the question that has been living in the body finally finds the words it was waiting for. For some people, it comes in the silence between the last coin toss and the moment of looking at what the coins said, in the half-second when the mind, not yet looking at the image, is still holding the question, and the question in that moment is clearer than it has been all night. For some people, it comes here in the dark, listening to the narration of a book they have not yet held, finding in the description of someone else's method the shape of their own undone articulation. The method is various. The prior act, the naming, the stating, the arriving at the question in words is not. We will cross the water now, into the nearer history, into the Germany of 1924 and the America of 1950, and the rooms where the book found the people who were looking for something and did not yet know this was what they were looking for. Richard Wilhelm arrived in China in 1899. He was a German pastor sent to Qingdao as a missionary, and by his own account, he converted almost no one. What happened instead was that China converted him, quietly, over years, the way a river changes a stone without the stone noticing until it is smooth. He learned the language. He sat with scholars. He was given access to teachers who trusted him in the way teachers sometimes trust a foreigner, precisely because the foreigner has no prior investment in what they are about to hear. And at some point in those years, through a friendship with the Confucian scholar Lao Nai San, he began to sit with the I Ching. He did not approach it as a curiosity. He approached it the way it asks to be approached, slowly, with a question, willing to be answered in landscape. He spent years with it. What came out of those years, in 1924, was a German translation that scholars still argue about, whether it sacrifices precision for beauty, whether it imports too much of its era's philosophy onto an ancient text, whether Wilhelm's own particular way of understanding things coloured the hexagrams too deeply. These are real arguments. They are also arguments that only matter if you believe translation is a neutral act, which it is not, and never has been. Every translation is also a reading. Wilhelm's reading was patient, serious, and soaked in decades of living in the country where the book had spent 3,000 years. The German version existed for 26 years before most Americans could read it. In 1950, a woman named Carey F. Baines took Wilhelm's German and carried it into English. The Bollingen Foundation supported the work. Princeton University Press published it. The Wilhelm Baines edition, that is what it is called, both names, both journeys, both crossings of the thing, became the book in English. If you have ever picked up an I Ching in an American bookstore, or found one on a shelf in a house you were visiting, or been handed one by someone who said you needed it, the odds are very good that it was this edition. the square paperback with the hexagram on the cover. The particular cadences of the judgments and the images, with their slightly formal, slightly ancient-feeling English, sublime success, furthering through perseverance, the earth's condition is receptive devotion. Those came from Baines's rendering of Wilhelm's German of a text that began in Chinese roughly 3,000 years before any of them were born. Before the text, there was a foreword. Carl Gustav Jung wrote it. Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist, the founder of analytical psychology, a man who had spent his career thinking seriously about the contents of the human unconscious and what it means for a mind to encounter something it did not already know it was looking for. He had been using the I Ching for decades before he wrote the foreword. Not as a fortune teller uses it, as a psychologist uses a mirror. His foreword did something very specific for the Western reader. It gave the book a new filing. The old filing was prediction, fortune-telling, the casting of fate by a system of lines and commentary. Jung's foreword proposed something else entirely. He proposed that what the I Ching offered was not prediction, but synchronicity. A word he coined for the experience of meaningful coincidence that has no causal relationship. Two things happening at the same moment that seem to speak to each other, not because one caused the other, but because the mind encountering both finds a pattern that means something. His argument was that the I Ching works not because it predicts the future, but because when you cast it in a particular moment, what the hexagram names is also what the moment is made of. The moment has a character. The hexagram reflects that character. Not through magic, not through causation, through the mind's astonishing ability to find in an image the shape of something it already knew but had not yet articulated. This is a more interesting argument than fortune-telling. It is also, if you sit with it quietly, essentially the same argument we have been making in a different direction all night. The hexagram reflects the character of the moment. The character of the moment is what you brought to the casting. What you brought to the casting is the question you have been carrying, and the image you receive gives you a surface to project that question onto, to see it from outside, clearly, the way you cannot see it from inside, where it lives. The book does not tell you what is coming. The book shows you what you are holding. The rest is yours. Jung's foreword put the book in the hands of millions of Western readers who would have walked past it if it had been filed only under occult divination. That is an enormous gift. Whatever you think of Jung's particular theory of synchronicity, whatever you think of whether meaningful coincidence is a real phenomenon or a feature of the mind that finds patterns everywhere it looks. He moved the book from the shelf where predictions are sold to the shelf where the human mind examines itself. That is where the book had always belonged. Take a slow breath here. Let the German and the English and the foreword settle. Let 1924 and 1950 and the Bollingen Foundation rest gently alongside each other, not held tightly, just present. The book travelled a long way to get to you. Through Zhou dynasty bronze vessels and Warring States bamboo strips and Han dynasty silk and woodblock print and Bavarian scholarship and Swiss psychology and American distribution networks. All of that is just the vessel. What was inside the vessel was the same thing it had always been. 64 landscapes. The instruction. Who to become. The request. State your question first. When you are ready, we will continue. The 1960s received the book differently. By 1962, the Wilhelm Baines paperback had found its way into American counterculture with the particular intensity of something that a certain kind of restless, questioning, aesthetically serious person picks up and does not put down for a decade. The book fit the era not because the era was interested in ancient Chinese philosophy, but because the era was interested in dismantling the assumption that there was one correct way to make a decision, that the rational, linear, cause and effect model of thinking about a life was the only model. The I Ching offered something that felt like an alternative method. You cast it. You received an image. You sat with the image. You made the connection yourself. For a generation that was suspicious of authority telling it what to do, a book that refused to tell you what to do had an obvious appeal. But two encounters with the book in those years go deeper than counterculture atmosphere. They are specific, and they repay attention. John Cage was a composer, American, mid-century, relentlessly interested in the question of what sound could be if you loosened your grip on its arrangement. He had been studying Zen Buddhism since the late 1940s and had arrived, through that study, at a serious interest in chants as a compositional method. The question he was asking, which was a real question, not a gimmick, was this: what does music become if the composer stops imposing personal preference on every decision? What is left? Is there something underneath the composer's choices that is simply the character of the sounds themselves? He turned to the I Ching for an answer that was also a method. In 1951, 9 years before the counterculture would make this kind of thing fashionable, Cage used the I Ching to compose a work for piano called Music of Changes. The name is a translation of the I Ching's name. Every compositional decision, which note, how long, how loud, how soft, what followed what, was made by casting the hexagrams. The book's 64 figures, applied to 64 possibilities in each category, generated the structure of the piece through chance operations. The music that came out was not random. That is the important part. It had a character. People who heard it heard a piece of music, not noise. Cage's argument was that the character came from the sounds themselves once the composer's will was removed from the filtering. The hexagrams did not add character. They removed interference. He went on using the I Ching for the rest of his compositional life. The book was not a mystical authority for him. It was a method for getting out of his own way long enough to hear what was already there. Philip K. Dick had a different relationship with the book, and it was more personal, more tangled, more like the way most people actually come to the I Ching. Not as a compositional technique, but as a companion in uncertainty. In 1962, Dick published a novel called The Man in the High Castle. It is set in an alternate history in which the Allied powers lost the Second World War and the United States is occupied, partly by Germany and partly by Japan. It won the Hugo Award. It is considered one of the essential works of American science fiction. What many readers did not know when they first read it was that Dick had written it the way you consult the I Ching. He cast the hexagrams to make plot decisions. When a character came to a fork in the road, Dick would cast the book and let the hexagram guide which direction the story went. The structure of the novel, its particular quality of feeling slightly sideways from a determined reality, of being a world that is almost this world but not quite, of decisions made by a logic that is real but not obvious, came in part from the way the book handles contingency. Which is to say, as landscape, not verdict. There is a detail that doubles the thing back on itself. Inside The Man in the High Castle, one of the characters, a Japanese diplomat named Mr. Togomi, consults the I Ching to help him understand an event he cannot make sense of. The book appears inside the book. The method that Dick used to write the novel appears as an object within the novel's world. The alternate history of a world where the axis 1 was partly structured by a Chinese book that a character in that alternate world also consults. The I Ching, in other words, both wrote the novel and lives inside it. This is the kind of thing that would have pleased Jung, not as magic, as a very precise example of how a structure that is old enough and deep enough tends to appear at multiple scales at once, the way a river's pattern appears in both the whole river and in each of its tributaries. Let us pause here. Rest for a moment. These are large things, composition and contingency and alternate worlds. Set them down gently. You do not need to hold them. They are already held by the people they belong to. What is yours tonight is the quality of the question underneath each of them. Cage's question about what is left when preference is removed. Dick's question about which way the story goes when you stop insisting it must go the way you had planned. These are not only aesthetic questions, they are midnight questions. The kind that visit when the lights are low and the mind has stopped pretending it knows what it is doing. Take a breath. Notice the dark. When you are ready, we will go back further, much further, to the moment when the book and the modern world turned out to be built from the same thing. The year was 1703. The place was Hanover, in what is now Germany. The man was Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, co-inventor with Isaac Newton of calculus, philosopher, diplomat, one of the most relentlessly curious minds that has ever occupied a human body. Leibniz had been working for years on a system he called the dyadic arithmetic. Binary. The idea that all numbers could be expressed using only two symbols, 0 and 1, rather than the 10 we use in ordinary counting. He saw in this a deep philosophical principle, almost a theological one, that from nothing and something, from 0 and 1, from absence and presence, all other numbers could be generated. Creation from a binary distinction. He was corresponding with a Jesuit missionary named Joachim Bouvet, who was living in China as part of a decades-long effort by the Jesuit order to understand and engage with Chinese civilization. Bouvet was a serious scholar. He sent Lebanese things, observations, texts, images. In 1703, Bouvet sent Lebanese a diagram. It was the arrangement of the 64 hexagrams attributed to the Song dynasty scholar Shao Yong, an arrangement that had been worked out roughly 700 years earlier, in which the hexagrams were laid out in a particular sequence according to the gradual addition of yang lines to yin lines, beginning with all broken and moving toward all solid. Leibniz looked at the diagram. He looked at the broken lines, empty, absent, 0. He looked at the unbroken lines, present, solid, 1. He looked at the hexagrams as 6-digit binary numbers, read from bottom to top. He saw his own arithmetic, the hexagram with 6 broken lines, which we have met as kun, the receptive, the pure yielding earth, in binary, read from the bottom. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, the hexagram with 6 unbroken lines, which we have met as Qian, the creative, the pure active heaven, in binary, 11, 11. 63. Every hexagram in between is a 6-digit binary number, all 64 of them. In order, from the arrangement Shao Yong had worked out, they count from 0 to 63. Leibniz was astonished. He wrote about it. He took it as confirmation of his binary system. Here, in a 3,000-year-old Chinese oracle, was the same fundamental structure he had been developing. The broken or unbroken line, the yielding or firm, the yin or yang, it was 0 and 1. It was his arithmetic. It had been there all along. This is the unexpected connection that the title seeded at the beginning of the night, the same object that modern computing runs on. A stack of binary digits, 6 deep, is the literal construction principle of the I Ching's 64 figures. The book is not an ancient computer. The book does not compute anything, in the sense we mean. But its architecture and the architecture of every processor in every phone and laptop and server in the world are built from the identical underlying abstraction. A thing is either this or that, firm or yielding, 1 or 0, and you stack them, and from the stacking you get every possible state. Zhou dynasty diviners in the 11th century BCE, counting yarrow stalks, arrived at the same binary formalism that Leibniz formalized in 1679 and that Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace and eventually Claude Shannon and the entire history of modern computation built everything on. Nobody planned this. It is not magic. It is simply the fact that binary representation is one of the most natural ways a sufficiently careful mind arrives at the structure of difference. The observation that everything that can be distinguished can be expressed as a sequence of binary choices. The ancient Chinese got there early. They used it for a different purpose. The purpose turned out to matter much less than the structure, which has turned out to be everywhere. Leibniz never visited China. Bouvet never met Leibniz in person. The diagram travelled by ship across the known world and arrived in Hanover and was recognized by a man who was ready to recognize it as something he already knew. The book is patient. It goes where it is needed, in the form the recipient can receive. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the binary arithmetic settle. Let 0 and 1 rest in the dark. Let the broken and unbroken lines simply be what they are. A line is either whole or it is not, and from that single fact, everything else can follow. You do not need to understand the mathematics. You do not need to hold Leibniz and Beauvais and Xiaoyong together in your mind. They are resting too. What remains now is the thing we have been moving toward all night, the thing the whole book has been circling, the reveal that was seeded in the first lines of this narration when we said, "It has never given an answer. We are ready for it now." 3,000 years is a long time to consult a book that does not answer. If you wanted predictions, if what you needed at midnight, in the middle of a difficult decision, was for something outside yourself to tell you what was going to happen, you would not keep returning to a book that responded to your question by describing a landscape. A rising dragon, a fox at the edge of the ice, a sprout pushing against a stone. You would find a book that answered you. You would find a method that closed the loop. The I Ching has been consulted continuously for 3,000 years by Zhou dynasty court officials making decisions of state, by Han dynasty scholars annotating its philosophy, by Tang dynasty poets using it as an image source, by Song dynasty Neo-Confucianists deepening its metaphysics, by people who were afraid and people who were hopeful, and people who were sitting in prison composing judgments for hexagrams, and people who were sitting in the dark like you are now, turning something over that they could not put down. For 3,000 years it has not answered, and nobody stopped consulting it. This is not a mystery about the book. It is a revelation about what was actually being asked. People were not, in the deepest sense, after prediction. If they had been after prediction, the book's persistent refusal to predict would have been experienced as a failure, and the book would have been discarded, and we would not be here tonight. A method that fails to do what it promises does not survive 3,000 years of daily use. The book survived because it was doing something else. Something that people needed badly enough to keep returning to across 100 generations. And that thing, the thing it was doing all along, through the yarrow stalks and the coins and the images and the commentaries and the German translation and the English foreword and the counterculture paperbacks and the composers and the novelists and the philosophers, was this: it was forcing you to finish the question. You cannot consult the I Ching without first stating what you are asking. That is the requirement, not a suggestion, not a preparation, the requirement. The book asks you, before the stalks, before the coins, before the image, to say in words what you are carrying, to name it, to move it from the wordless circling that has been going on in the body for hours or days or years, to the specific, located, utterable thing. This is what I am asking. The naming is the hardest part. We have said this several times tonight in different ways, because it bears saying several times in different ways. The decision you have been turning over is not unclear because the decision is too complex. It is unclear because you have not said it. And you have not said it because saying it makes it real. And real things have consequences, and consequences change you. The I Ching is a machine for making you say it anyway. The ritual demands the question. The question, once stated, is already halfway resolved, not because the hexagram will resolve it, but because you can now look at it from the outside. You have externalized it. You have given it a shape that fits in language. And language, once applied to a thing, begins to make that thing available to thought in a way that wordless circling never does. The hexagram comes after. The image is given. You look at the image. You sit with the landscape, the dragon in the field, the mare crossing the open plain, the young sprout pushing up through hard ground, and the image does what images do, which is to act as a surface for projection. You see in it what you are carrying. You find in it the shape of the thing you have just named. And you understand the thing you have named a little differently than you did before, because now you are seeing it from two directions at once, from the inside where it lives in you, and from the outside where it lives in the image. That is all the book does. That is everything the book does. And it is the only thing that ever actually helps at midnight. Not prediction, not prophecy, not the closing of an uncertain future into a certain one, but the clarification of what you are holding right now, in this moment, in your body and your mind, in the wordless pressure of an undeclared decision. The reveal that took 3,000 years to make legible is a very simple one. The question was the point. It was always the point. The book was the structure you needed to make yourself ask it. Everything else, the lines and the trigrams and the hexagrams and the commentaries and the images and the line texts and the changing lines and the second hexagram and the judgments and the images and all of it, all of that was the ritual that made the asking possible. The frame that allowed the mind to say, this is serious enough to state clearly. This deserves the slowness and the ceremony of a method that has been used by 3,000 years of serious people. This deserves to be named. And so you named it. And the book handed you a landscape. And somewhere in the landscape you found what you had been carrying. The book has 64 landscapes. They cover every situation. Not because 64 is a magic number, though 2 to the 6th power is a very elegant one, but because 64 is enough. Enough variation, enough combination of the 8 natural images to find a surface for whatever you brought with you. The landscape you receive is not the answer to your question, it is a mirror for it. And what you see in the mirror is not the future. It is you, right now, clearly. That is what you came for. That is what everyone who has ever opened this book came for, whether they knew it or not. The wanting to know what happens was always also a wanting to know what you were holding. The oracle was always also a mirror. The 64 hexagrams were always also 64 invitations to complete the sentence you had been leaving unfinished in the dark. The book ends on hexagram 64. This is the last thing. The thing the book chose to close on, deliberately, after everything. The 63rd hexagram is called Yijing, after completion. It is the hexagram of something finished, a thing accomplished. All 6 lines in their ideal positions, yin and yang alternating in perfect order, each in its proper place. The image of a task concluded, a journey arrived, a thing that was uncertain, now resolved. It is the natural ending of a book. The 64th hexagram is called Wei Ji, before completion. The character Wei means not yet. Ji means crossing. The image of the hexagram is a young fox that has almost crossed a frozen river. It has nearly made it. The far bank is close. And at the last step, in the final moment of the crossing, it gets its tail wet. Not yet across. The Book of Changes ends on not yet across. It ends one chapter past the natural ending point, on a hexagram that refuses to arrive, on a young fox with a wet tail one step from the bank. The most read, most consulted, most argued over book in the history of Chinese civilization, and possibly the oldest book still in daily use anywhere on earth, ends on before completion. This is not an accident. The 10 Wings, the philosophical commentaries, note this deliberate arrangement. A book of changes cannot end on a completed state. A completed state is no longer changing. The moment you arrive, you are already somewhere new, facing a new river, asking a new question. The book knows this. The book ends on not yet, because not yet is the permanent condition. The question is always still being formed. The crossing is always still in progress. The far bank, when you reach it, turns out to be the near bank of another river. And so the book you cannot finish asking is, appropriately, a book that does not finish. It puts you down on the near bank of another river and leaves you there, held in the not yet, which is the only place the living ever actually are. The young fox stands at the edge of the far bank. The tail is wet. The crossing is almost complete. The book closes. You are the fox. You are always the fox. You are always almost across. And that is not a problem. That is what it is to be alive. Let us pause here, in the not yet, in the wide, quiet space of before completion. Let your breath be slow. Let your body rest against whatever is holding it. You do not need to cross tonight. You do not need to finish anything. The river will be there in the morning. The question will be there in the morning, slightly clearer than it was when you began tonight, because you have been sitting with it in a different way than usual, not turning it over in the wordless dark, but listening to someone else's description of a structure that has been holding questions for a long time. Something of that structure may have found its way into the body tonight. You don't need to check. It does its work quietly. We have come a long way together. We began with a paradox. A book asked its hardest questions for 3,000 years that has never once given an answer, and we have arrived, gently, at the reason that paradox is not a paradox at all. The book was never in the business of answering. It was always in the business of asking, of making the asker ask, of demanding, before the stalks, before the coins, before the image, the one thing that is actually useful, the question stated plainly, in words, held in the hands, like a real thing. We met the line that is either broken or unbroken. We met the 6 lines stacked into a hexagram, 64 of them, the complete set. The entire landscape of human situation contained in a binary choice repeated 6 times. We met the 8 natural images, heaven and earth, thunder and water, mountain and wind, fire and lake. We met the judgment and the image and the line statements, and we understood that none of them say what will happen. They say what kind of person to be when faced with this configuration of the world. We met the first hexagram, 6 solid lines, heaven the creative, the dragon rising from hiding to flight to the warning of the arrogant dragon, a study in timing, not a verdict. We met the second, 6 broken lines, earth, the receptive, the mare persevering across the open plain, the complement, not the inferior, the force that sustains what the first begins. We met the third hexagram, difficulty at the beginning, the sprout against the stone, and we understood that the book's first situation after the 2 pure forces is not triumph, but struggle. Because the first situation always is. We learned how the book is consulted, the 50 yarrow stalks of the Achillea plant, handled slowly through a ritual that gives the question time to form. The 3 coins tossed 6 times for those who need the method faster, the changing lines that flip and generate a second hexagram, the one you are tending toward, and the 4096 possible present to future pairings that result. We heard the traditional account of its origins, Fu Xi and the tortoise, King Wen composing in prison, the Duke of Zhou's line texts, Confucius wearing through the leather binding 3 times, and we held that account as legend, as tradition, as the story a civilization tells about its most important book, which is also a form of truth. We stood over the Mawangdui silk manuscripts, sealed in a tomb in 168 BC, and found the hexagrams in a completely different order, evidence that even the structure we call fixed was once in motion, was once being worked out, was once as uncertain as we are. We met Richard Wilhelm in Qingdao, sitting with his Confucian teacher, learning the book the way the book prefers to be learned. Slowly, in relationship, over years. We followed the German translation across the ocean and through Carrie Baines's patient English rendering and into the Bollingen Princeton paperback that arrived in American hands in 1950, carrying Carl Jung's foreword, which changed the filing from fortune-telling to psychology and gave a generation permission to take the book seriously without claiming to believe in fate. We sat with John Cage, composing music of changes in 1951 by casting hexagrams for every note, and we understood his question, what is left when the composer's preference is removed? We sat with Philip K. Dick, writing The Man in the High Castle in 1962 by consulting the book for every plot decision, and we found the book appearing inside the novel, the method becoming a character, the way of knowing the story shaping the story itself. And then we went back, further than the counterculture, further than the Bollingen Foundation, further than the Han Dynasty, to 1703, to a study in Hanover, where Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz opened a diagram sent by a Jesuit missionary in China and found, in the 64 hexagrams, the binary arithmetic he had spent years developing. 0 and 1. Broken and unbroken. The construction of a Bronze Age oracle and the construction of every digital device on Earth, the same formalism, arrived at independently 3,000 years apart. Because the structure of difference is the structure of difference, and it does not change with the era. You do not need to remember any of this. If one image stayed with you, the dragon hiding in the deep, the mare crossing the plain, the sprout against the stone, the fox at the edge of the river with a wet tail, let that be enough. The images do their work without being remembered. They settle in the body, and do what landscapes do, which is to be present without demanding attention. If one idea stayed with you, that the book forced you to finish the question before it would say anything at all, and that the finishing was the thing that helped, let that be enough. You may find, in the coming days, that a question you have been turning over without stating begins to find its words. Not because of anything this narration did, because the turning over eventually reaches the state of tiredness where the words come. The narration may have companioned that process a little. That is the most a narration can do, and it is enough. If nothing stayed except a general sense of an old book that travelled a long way to be held, from Zhou dynasty bamboo to silk to woodblock to Bavarian printing to American paperback to wherever you are right now, in the dark, listening, let that be enough too. The book has been travelling for 3,000 years. It does not mind if you did not take notes. The river is still there. The far bank is still there. The question, if you have one, is still yours. The crossing will happen in its time. For now, the only crossing required is the one from wakefulness into sleep. From the active mind that has been listening and following and thinking and reaching into what these old words mean, into the quiet water of rest. The change that needs no hexagram. The transition that every human being who has ever lived has made every night of their life, trustingly, without knowing exactly how. You are not required to understand it. You are only required to allow it. The body knows the way. The breath knows the pace. The dark is the same dark it has always been, the dark that held the yarrow stalks, the dark that held King Wen in his prison where he composed, the dark that held Confucius with his bamboo copy, whose leather binding wore through 3 times, the dark that held Lebanese at his desk when the diagram arrived and the binary numbers lit up inside the ancient lines. The same dark, the same capacity for rest. Yours now, freely, let the weight of the day release. Let the question rest alongside you, not in the grip where you have been holding it, but simply near. You will pick it up again. You know where it is. Tonight, it does not need to be solved. Tonight, it only needs to be set down. We have met the 64. We have walked the book from its first line to its last fox. We have sat with the mechanism that never answers and understood, finally, that the answer was never what we came for. We came for the structure that would make us say it. And we said it, or we almost said it, or we said enough of it, that the rest will come when it is ready. That is sufficient. That is more than sufficient. Sleep well tonight. The fox is resting on the bank, the river is still, the ice will hold until morning. You are not yet across, and you are exactly where you need to be. Subject closed for the night. Let it all relax away.